Trump's tariff policy, and its impact on American consumers and the auto industry. One of the central pillars of President Donald Trump's economic strategy involves imposing a hefty 25% tariff on all automobiles and automotive parts that are not manufactured within the borders of the United States. The stated goal of this policy is to incentivize domestic production by making foreign-made vehicles and components more expensive, thereby encouraging companies to shift their manufacturing operations back to American soil. On the surface, this could appear as a boon for U.S. workers, promising a resurgence of factory jobs and a revitalized industrial base. Trump has positioned this as a way to level the playing field, arguing that it protects American businesses from what he sees as unfair competition from overseas. Cars built entirely in the U.S., he claims, will face no such tariffs, theoretically giving them a competitive edge in the marketplace. However, the reality of this policy paints a far more complicated picture, particularly for the everyday American consumer and the broader automotive industry. Take, for instance, the ripple effect on car prices. A vehicle that once retailed for $48,000, a mid-range pickup truck or family SUV, for example, could now see its price tag balloon to as much as $60,000. This dramatic increase stems from the interconnected nature of modern car manufacturing, where even vehicles assembled in the U.S. rely heavily on parts sourced from abroad. The tariffs don't just apply to fully built cars crossing the border. They also hit the thousands of individual components, everything from engines to electronics, that are imported to complete the assembly process. As these costs pile up, manufacturers have little choice but to pass them on to buyers, effectively turning a policy meant to protect American jobs into a financial burden for American households. For consumers, this price hike is more than just an inconvenience. It's a direct hit to their wallets. Families already stretched thin by rising living costs now face the prospect of paying thousands more for a necessity like a vehicle. The average buyer isn't likely to see this as a patriotic sacrifice. Instead, it feels like a penalty for a supply chain they have no control over. Meanwhile, the auto industry itself is caught in a bind. Companies that have spent decades optimizing global production networks, sourcing affordable, high-quality parts from places like Mexico, Canada, or Asia, now face a sudden and steep increase in operating expenses. Some may try to absorb these costs to stay competitive, but most will inevitably raise prices, risking a drop in sales as demand weakens under the strain of higher sticker prices. Trump's tariff vision hinges on the idea that penalizing foreign goods will spark a manufacturing renaissance in the U.S., but early signs suggest it's not that simple. The policy assumes companies can quickly and cheaply relocate complex supply chains, a process that, in practice, could take years and billions of dollars. In the meantime, the American consumer bears the brunt of this experiment, paying more for cars while hoping the promised jobs materialize. Whether this gamble pays off remains uncertain, but for now, the tariff has turned the dream of affordable, American-made vehicles into a costly reality. The Ford F-150, a symbol of American pride undermined by global realities and tariffs. The Ford F-150 stands as an enduring icon of American automotive culture, a rugged, reliable pickup truck that has long-topped sales charts and embodied the spirit of U.S. ingenuity and craftsmanship. For decades, it's been marketed as the epitome of American-made excellence, a vehicle that conjures images of hardworking folks on sprawling ranches or bustling construction sites. Yet beneath this patriotic veneer lies a stark truth. Even this celebrated truck isn't as American as its branding suggests. While the final assembly of the F-150 takes place on U.S. soil, the vehicle is a patchwork of components sourced from across the globe, a reality that President Trump's 25% tariff on imported parts has thrust into the spotlight with unintended consequences. Consider the sheer complexity of a modern vehicle like the F-150. It's not just a frame and an engine slapped together in a Detroit factory. It's a sophisticated machine comprising upwards of 30,000 individual parts. These pieces hail from more than 24 countries, each contributing to the truck's functionality and affordability. Alternators might roll in from Mexico, where labor costs are lower and production is streamlined. Wheels could arrive from South Korea, a hub for precision manufacturing. Drive shafts might cross the border from Canada, a trusted neighbor in North America's integrated trade network. This global supply chain isn't a flaw, it's a strength, allowing Ford to keep prices competitive while maintaining quality. But Trump's tariffs upend this delicate balance, slapping a 25% tax on every foreign-made component that crosses into the U.S., regardless of whether the finished truck is assembled domestically. The financial fallout is staggering. For the F-150, those imported parts now drive up production costs significantly. Estimates suggest that tariffs on components from Canada and Mexico alone could tack on $3,000 per truck. Factor in parts from farther afield, like South Korea, and the price could climb by another $3,000 to $6,000. Then there's the added sting of tariffs on raw materials like steel and aluminum, key ingredients in any vehicle, which might boost costs by an additional $400 to $600. Suddenly, a truck that once rolled off the lot for a reasonable sum is thousands of dollars pricier, all because of a policy meant to celebrate American manufacturing. The irony is thick. The F-150, a symbol of national pride, becomes a case study in how tariffs can backfire, making an American product less affordable for the very people it's meant to represent. This isn't just about numbers, it's about perception. The F-150's image as a homegrown hero takes a hit when buyers realize how much of it relies on foreign ingenuity. Ford, like other automakers, has leaned on globalization to thrive, and Trump's tariffs expose this dependency in a way that's hard to ignore. For consumers, the higher price tags feel like a betrayal of the truck's all-American promise. For the industry, it's a wake-up call. A policy designed to protect domestic production might instead punish the companies and workers it claims to champion, all while challenging the myth of a purely American-made vehicle. Economic fallout of Trump's tariffs. A dream of jobs meets a harsh reality. At the heart of President Trump's tariff strategy lies a bold promise. By slapping a 25% tax on imported cars and parts, he aims to lure manufacturing back to the United States, sparking a wave of job creation and breathing new life into the nation's industrial heartland. The vision is compelling, factories humming with activity, workers clocking in for steady shifts, and communities revitalized by the return of blue-collar prosperity. The logic seems straightforward. Make foreign goods costlier, and companies will have no choice but to set up shop on American soil to avoid the penalties. It's a narrative that resonates with those yearning for a return to the days when Made in the USA was a badge of honor. Yet, as the policy unfolds, the economic consequences reveal a far messier truth, one where the hoped-for gains are overshadowed by rising costs, disrupted industries, and a stubborn resistance to change. The reality begins with the numbers. Take a typical car rolling off an assembly line. Its price doesn't just reflect labor and steel. It's tied to a sprawling network of global suppliers. Trump's tariffs hit these imported components hard, driving up production expenses by thousands of dollars per vehicle. Manufacturers, squeezed between higher costs and competitive pricing, often pass the burden on to consumers, meaning a family sedan or pickup truck now costs significantly more. This isn't a minor hiccup. Estimates suggest price hikes of $3,000 to $6,000 per car, depending on how much it relies on foreign parts. Add in tariffs on essentials like steel and aluminum, and the tally climbs higher still. For American buyers, this translates to a tangible loss of purchasing power, forcing tough choices between a new vehicle and other household needs. Far from a manufacturing boom, the immediate effect is a squeeze on demand, as pricier cars sit unsold on lots. Then there's the job question. Trump's tariffs bank on companies uprooting their overseas operations and rebuilding them in the U.S., but that's easier said than done. Shifting an entire supply chain, think factories, warehouses, and logistics networks, is a monumental task requiring years of planning and billions in investment. One study highlights the scale. Relocating production could take a decade and cost automakers dearly, all while risking delays and quality dips as new facilities ramp up. In the meantime, companies might not hire more workers. They could turn to automation instead, using robots to offset rising costs without adding human jobs. The result? Instead of a hiring spree, the industry faces potential layoffs as sales slump and production adjusts to the new reality. Workers, promised a lifeline, might find themselves sidelined by machines or caught in a shrinking market. The broader economic picture darkens further. Higher costs ripple beyond carmakers, hitting suppliers, dealerships, and even small businesses tied to the auto sector. The tariffs, meant to protect American interests, risk sparking a slowdown instead, as consumer spending falters and industries grapple with uncertainty. Trump's gamble hinges on a long-term payoff, but the short-term pain, higher prices, fewer sales, and elusive jobs, casts doubt on whether this economic experiment will deliver the revival he envisions, or simply leave the nation footing the bill. The U.S. auto industry in chaos, tariffs shatter a well-oiled machine. For decades, the American auto industry has thrived on a finely tuned system of global collaboration, weaving together suppliers from across borders into a seamless production network. Countries like Mexico and Canada have played starring roles, providing affordable parts and labor that keep U.S.-assembled cars competitive on the world stage. This intricate supply chain has been a cornerstone of the industry's success, allowing giants like Ford and General Motors to churn out vehicles efficiently while balancing cost and quality. Enter President Trump's 25% tariff on imported cars and components, a policy pitched as a shield for American workers. And suddenly, this well-oiled machine is grinding to a halt, replaced by a state of upheaval that threatens the very foundation it was meant to protect. The disruption starts with the tariff's broad reach. Every bolt, battery, and brake pad sourced from abroad now carries a steep surcharge, jacking up the cost of building a car in the U.S. for an industry accustomed to lean operations. This is a seismic shift. A mid-sized sedan might see its production price spike by thousands of dollars, as components from trusted partners like Canada, think drive shafts, or Mexico, think wiring harnesses, become pricier overnight. Manufacturers face a dilemma: absorb the hit and watch profits shrink, or pass it on to consumers and risk losing sales. Most opt for the latter, but the damage doesn't stop there. The tariffs unravel decades of logistical harmony, forcing companies to scramble for alternatives. Do they stick with imports and eat the cost, or hunt for domestic suppliers that may not exist at scale? Either way, the clock is ticking, and the answers aren't coming fast enough. This chaos extends beyond factory floors. The auto industry's supply chain is a web of interdependent players, parts makers, shippers, dealers, all now caught in the crossfire. A delay in one link, like a tariff-delayed shipment from South Korea, can stall entire assembly lines, idling workers and hemorrhaging money. Meanwhile, automakers are forced into a high-stakes distraction. Instead of pouring resources into designing sleeker electric models or cutting-edge safety features, they're bogged down in debates over sourcing. Should they renegotiate with Mexico? Scour the U.S. for untested vendors? Each choice carries risks, higher costs, lower quality, or both, pulling focus from the innovation that keeps them ahead of rivals like Tesla or Toyota. The result is an industry on edge, less nimble and more vulnerable in a global market that waits for no one. The turmoil isn't just operational, it's existential. Trump's tariffs aim to fortify American manufacturing, but they've instead exposed its reliance on the very globalization he rails against. The U.S. auto sector, once a symbol of industrial might, now grapples with a fractured backbone, its competitive edge dulled by self-inflicted wounds. As production costs climb and innovation stalls, the industry faces a stark question. Can it adapt to this new reality, or will it crumble under the weight of a policy that promised strength but delivered disarray? China's rise, seizing the wheel as U.S. tariffs stall progress. While the United States wrestles with the fallout of President Trump's 25% tariff on imported cars and parts, a formidable rival is quietly accelerating past it on the global stage: China. The tariffs, intended to bolster American manufacturing, have plunged the U.S. auto industry into a quagmire of rising costs and supply chain chaos. Meanwhile, China has seized the moment, rapidly transforming itself into the world's leading car exporter, a shift that underscores a timeless truth in business and geopolitics. It's not always the strongest who prevail, but the swiftest. As America stumbles under the weight of its own policies, China's nimble ascent is reshaping the automotive landscape, leaving industry watchers to wonder if the U.S. is losing its grip on a sector it once dominated. China's climb isn't accidental. It's the fruit of years of strategic ambition. Unburdened by the tariff tug-of-war consuming the U.S., Chinese automakers have doubled down on efficiency and scale. They've poured resources into electric vehicles, EVs, a market poised to define the future, churning out affordable models that appeal to cost-conscious buyers worldwide. Companies like BYD and NIO aren't just competing on price. They're innovating at a breakneck pace, backed by a government that sees cars as a ticket to global influence. While American firms scramble to rewire supply chains disrupted by tariffs, sourcing pricier parts or debating domestic alternatives, China has streamlined its operations, locking in raw materials and building export hubs. The result? A flood of Chinese vehicles hitting markets from Europe to Southeast Asia, often at prices U.S. manufacturers can't match. Contrast is stark. In the U.S., tariffs have driven up production costs, tacking on thousands to the price of a car and slowing the shift to cutting-edge tech like EVs. Automakers, distracted by logistical headaches, are losing ground in a race where innovation is currency. China, meanwhile, faces no such shackles. Its exports surged in recent years, with industry data showing it overtaking traditional powerhouses like Japan and Germany. This isn't just about volume, it's about momentum. As one expert put it, the game today favors the fast over the slow, and America's tariff tangle has left it lagging, bogged down in debates over steel duties while China races ahead with batteries and software. For the U.S., the stakes are high. The auto industry isn't just an economic engine, it's a symbol of national prowess. Losing dominance to China could signal a broader decline, especially as global demand pivots to sustainable transport. Trump's tariffs aim to protect American interests, but they've handed China an opening to outpace a distracted rival. Industry leaders are sounding alarms, urging a rethink of a strategy that's tying one hand behind America's back. As China's cars roll off ships worldwide, the question looms: can the U.S. regain its footing, or will it watch from the sidelines as a new leader steers the future of mobility? Strained bonds. U.S.-Canada relations fray under Trump's tariff offensive. The United States and Canada have long shared one of the world's tightest partnerships, a bond forged through geography, trade, and a history of mutual support. Nowhere is this more evident than in the auto industry, where parts zip across the border daily, fueling a seamless production network that keeps cars rolling off American and Canadian assembly lines alike. President Trump's decision to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, cars, steel, aluminum, and more, has upended this harmony, casting a shadow over a relationship once seen as unshakable. Dubbed Liberation Day by Trump on April 2nd, the policy was meant to free the U.S. economy from foreign reliance. But for Canada, it's less a liberation than an economic assault, igniting tensions that threaten to unravel decades of trust. The impact hits hard and fast. Canada isn't just a neighbor, it's a linchpin in the U.S. auto supply chain, sending over components like engines and chassis that American factories depend on. The tariffs slap a steep surcharge on these goods, driving up costs for U.S. automakers by thousands per vehicle. A truck built in Detroit with Canadian parts could see its price jump $3,000 or more, a burden that lands squarely on American consumers. For Canada, the stakes are even higher. The U.S. is its biggest market, with trade ties worth nearly $500 billion tied to autos alone. Trump's move doesn't just sting, it jeopardizes jobs and livelihoods north of the border, prompting a fierce backlash. Canada has fired back with its own 25% tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting $107 billion worth of exports like whiskey and steel, signaling it won't sit idly by as its economy takes a hit. Beyond the numbers, the rift cuts deeper. Trump's rhetoric calling Canada's leader a governor and musing about annexing it as a 51st state has stoked outrage, turning a policy dispute into a diplomatic wound. Canadians see this as a betrayal, not just of trade norms but of a shared legacy. Veterans who fought alongside U.S. troops, dual citizens, and everyday folks feel the sting of a partner now acting more like a bully. Prime Minister Mark Carney has vowed a measured but firm response, rallying public support to safeguard national interests. The anger isn't confined to government halls. It's spilling into the streets, with citizens questioning whether the U.S. can still be relied upon as an ally. This isn't mere posturing. Canada's pivot to new trade and defense deals with Europe and Australia hints at a future less tethered to its southern neighbor. For the U.S., the fallout is a self-inflicted bruise. Trump's tariffs aim to bolster domestic strength, but they've alienated a key partner, disrupted a vital industry, and sparked a tit-for-tat trade war that benefits neither side. The liberation he champions risks isolating America, fraying a friendship that once underpinned North American prosperity. As tensions simmer, the question looms: can this alliance heal, or will Trump's gamble leave the U.S. standing alone, facing a colder northern border? Economic tremors. Trump's erratic tariffs push the U.S. toward uncertainty. President Trump's tariff policies have unleashed a whirlwind of instability across the U.S. economy, turning what was meant to be a shield for American industry into a source of unpredictable turbulence. The 25% levy on imported cars and parts, rolled out with fanfare, has been anything but steady. Imposed, reversed, then reimposed in a dizzying cycle that's left businesses, investors, and consumers reeling. One day, tariffs hammer Canadian steel. The next, they're lifted from Mexico, only to loom again weeks later. This flip-flopping isn't a minor quirk. It's a wrecking ball, smashing the consistency that economies crave. The result? A projected 3% GDP shrink in the first quarter, a stock market plunge wiping out billions, and whispers of a recession that feel less like speculation and more like a gathering storm. The chaos starts with the auto industry, a bellwether for broader economic health. Tariffs jack up the cost of imported components, say $3,000 extra per car from Canada or Mexico, forcing manufacturers to hike prices or bleed profits. But when the rules shift overnight, planning becomes a guessing game. A factory can't order parts or hire workers if it doesn't know whether tomorrow's shipment will cost 25% more or nothing at all. This uncertainty paralyzes expansion. Why build a new plant when the ground keeps shifting? The stock market feels the jitters too. After Trump's latest tariff twist, the S&P 500 shed 2% in a day, as major funds dumped shares, spooked by a government that can't stick to a script. That's not just numbers on a screen. It's retirement accounts, small businesses, and jobs evaporating in hours. Consumers aren't spared either. A car that once fit a family budget now strains it, as tariff-driven price hikes ripple through showrooms. Sales slump, dealerships falter, and the slowdown spreads. Fewer tires sold, less steel forged, fewer truckers hauling goods. Analysts warn this isn't a blip. A 3% GDP drop signals a stalling engine, a far cry from the 3–4% growth some say could have held under steadier policies. Trump's team spins it as a strategic tweak, but the pattern, tariffs on, tariffs off, tariffs maybe, looks less like a plan and more like panic. One minute Mexico's off the hook until April 2nd, the next, Canada's auto sector gets a reprieve. No one knows what's next, and that's the problem. Unpredictability breeds fear, and fear freezes economies. The bigger picture is sobering. A strong economy thrives on trust, trust that rules won't change mid-game, that investments won't sour overnight. Trump's tariff roller coaster erodes that faith, leaving the U.S. vulnerable. Experts at J.P. Morgan and beyond see recessionary red flags, shrinking output, rattled markets, and a government doubling down on a gamble that's not paying off. Is this a bold reset or a spiral into crisis? For now, the U.S. teeters on the edge, its economic fate tied to a policy that promises protection but delivers pandemonium, testing whether it can steady itself before the wheels come off entirely. Trump's grand claims, a $1.4 trillion mirage from the UAE. President Trump has never shied away from bold pronouncements, and his latest economic boast is a whopper. A staggering $1.4 trillion investment from the United Arab Emirates, UAE, into the U.S. over the next decade. Delivered with his signature flair, the figure dazzles, promising a flood of cash to supercharge American industry, create jobs, and cement his image as a deal-making titan. Picture factories rising, workers hired, and the economy roaring, all thanks to a Middle Eastern ally flush with oil wealth. It's the kind of headline that grabs attention and fuels rally cheers, a shiny carrot dangled before a nation hungry for good news. But beneath the glitz, a nagging question lingers. Is this a realistic pledge, or just another splashy Trump exaggeration designed to dazzle rather than deliver? Let's unpack the math. The UAE's economy isn't small. Its GDP hovers around $514 billion a year, driven by oil, trade, and tourism. Yet Trump's claim suggests it'll pour nearly 3 times that amount into the U.S. over 10 years. That's a jaw-dropping commitment, about $140 billion annually, or a quarter of the UAE's entire economic output funneled across the Atlantic every year for a decade. For context, the UAE's sovereign wealth funds, among the world's richest, manage vast sums, but even they don't toss around that kind of money without ironclad plans. No contracts, timelines, or sectors have been detailed, just a big number and a handshake promise. Compare that to, say, Saudi Arabia's $20 billion investment in a single U.S. project a few years back, and Trump's figure starts to feel more like a stretch than a strategy. This fits a familiar playbook, Trump economics, where the size of the claim matters more than the substance behind it. Step 1. Pick a colossal number, billions, trillions, whatever sticks. Step 2. Tie it to a wealthy, oil-rich nation like the UAE, whose gilded reputation lends a sheen of plausibility. Step 3. Blast it out on Truth Social, let Fox News amplify it, and watch the narrative take root. It's less about verification and more about vibe, a feel-good story to rally supporters and silence skeptics, but the cracks show fast. Without specifics, no signed deals, no industries named, the $1.4 trillion feels flimsy, a castle built on sand. Could the UAE invest big in the U.S.? Sure, it's got the cash, but nearly triple its GDP's worth with no paper trail. That's a leap even optimists struggle to buy. For Americans, the stakes are real. If true, this could juice the economy, think infrastructure, tech, or energy booming with Emirati dollars. But if it's hype, it's just noise, a distraction from tariff woes and rising costs. Critics call it a stunt, a shiny object to wave while the U.S. grapples with trade wars and market jitters. Supporters say give it time, Trump's a closer, not a details guy. Either way, the gap between promise and proof is glaring. Is this a lifeline or a mirage? Until the UAE inks a check, it's a $1.4 trillion question mark, dangling over an economy that can't afford more empty boasts. A nation stirs, public outrage in Canada's pivot amid Trump's tariff storm. President Trump's 25% tariff on imported cars and parts has ignited more than just economic ripples. It sparked a firestorm of discontent across the United States and beyond, pushing ordinary Americans into the streets and prompting Canada to rethink its alliances. At home, the policy's fallout, cars costing thousands more, jobs teetering as sales dip, has morphed into a visceral backlash. From Denver, where 35,000 rallied in a sea of frustration, to Tucson, where crowds swelled 8 times beyond expectations, people aren't just grumbling, they're shouting. This isn't a quiet protest, it's a roar against an economy that feels rigged, where tariffs meant to protect workers instead pile pressure on families already stretched thin. Meanwhile, Canada, stung by the same policy, is turning away from its southern neighbor, forging new paths that could reshape global ties. In the U.S., the anger is palpable. A pickup truck that once fit a blue-collar budget now demands a $6,000 premium, thanks to tariffs on parts from Canada or Mexico. For many, it's the breaking point. Wages stagnate, living costs soar, and now the family car feels like a luxury. Protests aren't just about price tags. They're a cry against a system where billionaires thrive while workers falter. Denver's marchers waved signs demanding relief, not rhetoric. Tucson's masses drowned out forecasts with a clear message. We won't take this. The unrest isn't fringe, it's mainstream, a swelling tide of citizens fed up with policies that promise prosperity but deliver pain. Experts warn this could tip into something bigger, an uprising not just against tariffs, but against a government deaf to the din of its people. Across the border, Canada's response is less loud but no less seismic. Hit hard by Trump's tariffs, 25% on steel, aluminum, and autos, the country isn't just licking its wounds, it's rewriting its playbook. Once a lockstep partner, Canada now sees the U.S. as erratic, its Liberation Day a betrayal of decades of trust. Rather than hunker down, it's striking out, inking defense deals with Australia for radar systems worth billions and trade pacts with the EU and Southeast Asia totaling $7 billion. These aren't stopgaps, they're a strategic pivot, a bid to diversify away from a neighbor whose unpredictability threatens Canada's economic core. Prime Minister Mark Carney frames it as resilience, a shield for workers and sovereignty against a U.S. that's more foe than friend. The ripple effects are profound. U.S. protests signal a domestic reckoning. Will Trump heed the clamor or double down as the economy wobbles? Canada's shift hints at a broader realignment, a North America less united and a world where old allies seek new friends. Tariffs aim to strengthen America's hand, but they've stirred a hornet's nest at home and pushed Canada to redraw the map. As streets fill and partnerships fray, the question hangs. Can the U.S. quell this unrest and mend these bonds, or has Trump's gamble set a course for isolation and upheaval? A crossroads for America, Trump's tariffs test free trade and global ties. President Trump's 25% tariff on imported cars and parts was billed as a masterstroke to reclaim American economic might, a defiant stand against a world he sees as taking advantage of the U.S.-branded Liberation Day. It's a policy rooted in the belief that shielding domestic industries will spark a manufacturing revival and restore national pride. Yet, as the dust settles, the move reveals a double-edged sword, slicing through the fabric of free trade and straining the diplomatic threads that have long tied the U.S. to its allies. Far from a clean victory, these tariffs raise a thorny question. Is this a bold new leadership path, or a reckless torching of bridges that America may soon regret? The assault on free trade is immediate and stark. For decades, the U.S. championed open markets, building a global system where goods flowed freely, costs stayed low, and innovation thrived. Tariffs upend that legacy, erecting walls that make cars pricier, $3,000 to $6,000 more per vehicle, and disrupt supply chains honed over years. Automakers, once free to source the best parts from Mexico or Canada, now face a costly scramble, diverting energy from building better cars to dodging tariff traps. This isn't just a hiccup, it's a retreat from the principles that fueled America's economic dominance. Critics argue it's a step backward, trading efficiency for isolation, while supporters see it as a necessary reset. Either way, the shift rattles a world accustomed to U.S. openness, leaving trading partners wary and competitors like China poised to fill the gap. Diplomatically, the damage cuts deeper. Canada, a steadfast ally, reels from what it calls an economic invasion, its steel and autos hit hard by Trump's levies. The response, retaliatory tariffs and a pivot to Europe and Australia, signals a fracture in a once ironclad bond. This isn't just about trade, it's personal. Trump's quips about Canada as a 51st state sting like salt in a wound, eroding trust built through wars and treaties. The fallout spreads, global markets dip, allies question America's reliability, and the U.S. risks standing alone as partners seek stability elsewhere. What was meant to project strength now looks like a gamble that's alienating friends and emboldening rivals, all while the domestic payoff remains elusive. The broader stakes loom large. If liberation means higher costs, fewer jobs, and a tarnished reputation, is it still leadership? Protests at home and Canada's drift suggest a policy misfiring on multiple fronts. Trump frames it as a fight for America, but the collateral damage, economic strain, diplomatic chill, hints at a Pyrrhic victory. The U.S. once led by fostering cooperation. Now it's pulling up drawbridges, betting on self-reliance over shared prosperity. Can it reclaim its footing as a global pace-setter? Or will these tariffs mark the start of a retreat, leaving America richer in rhetoric but poorer in influence? The answer hinges on whether this is a strategic pivot or a bridge-burning blunder, and time is running short to decide.